All right, welcome back to another episode of Dr. Schwartz and Mr. Power. I'm your host, Mr. Alex Power. Yes, that's my real name. As usual, we bring you a second serving of Alex, my friend and colleague, Dr. Alex Schwartz. How's it going?
I am operating within acceptable parameters. How's it going to you?
It's going well. That's precise.
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure what is, the band pass or the peak operating parameters or whatever it is you said. But yeah, as you know, I just got back from holidays.
I'm
Slowly
sorry.
adjusting. Yeah. So we went from Curacao, where when we left, it was 26 degrees. And when we landed here in the subarctic for home, it was minus 26. And that's always like a rough reentry, then, a couple
Whiplash.
mornings later. Yeah, seriously. And a couple mornings later, it was minus 36. So that
Woof.
notwithstanding, yeah, things are good. Missing my sea turtles, but I'm ready to podcast.
Those were
Here
some
we are.
great pictures. Excellent
Yeah, we
pictures.
like them.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, sea turtles are super cute. I had a strong urge to bring one home. That's
Kind of
apparently
can't. You
not
shouldn't.
allowed. Yeah,
So many reasons you
frowned
can't.
upon, frowned upon, but
Yeah.
they're pretty awesome. They're pretty
Yep.
cool. All right, so today we're going to talk about super heavyweight athletes and why they seem to have a low work capacity and recover more slowly. And in this context, we're using super heavyweight athlete to refer to any like very large athlete with a body fat percentage that would comfortably push them into, being with overweight or obesity territory. So just by way of image, think of, linemen in American football or, super heavyweight athletes in powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, even sumo wrestlers. No, we always call on sumo wrestlers. I've never actually known a sumo wrestler. It's a sport I wish was more popular because I don't know, there's just something cool about it. But they would
I
fall in
have a
that
good friend
category.
of mine that's been going and doing it. He's been going into it and doing training in amateur. It's
That's awesome. We should
yeah.
have them on the show or something. So yeah, this is a topic we raised in the last episode that we did on overweight and obese athletes and trainees, and I thought it deserved a bit of extra attention, partly because it gets there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding around this and a lot of lore around the explanation for the low work capacity of bigger athletes. So initially, we planned on this being a two-part series on the overweight obese athlete, but instead, we're giving you an extra serving. So this will be part 2 of 3. Next week's episode will cover how to deal with the overweight and obese athletes in terms of their training and how to address some of the issues we've discussed, both for their health and for improved performance. So now it's time for the plug. If you like our content, you like our podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe. Apparently, it's not just something all the podcasters say, it really does help the algorithm. Share it with your friends, broadcast it, like blast it out of your car like it's 1995 and you just bought like a new subwoofer.
My
Leave reviews.
Thunderbird.
Yeah, exactly. The screaming chicken. Yeah. So we also do, remote coaching and consulting services. So reach out to us directly if that's something you're looking for. If not, just thanks for tuning in and listening. All right. So I think most of us are familiar with the image that I briefly conjured of, the super heavyweight powerlifter or weightlifter relaxing for extended periods. Maybe they've got like a fold up chair at the gym, their equipment bags strewn about, maybe eating candy. Or, maybe I always think of like a lineman in American football with like an oxygen mask on in between plays trying to recover. That's a real thing. Or maybe you've seen, I'm not sure if you've seen this, Schwartz, but the meme of the athlete usually viewed in a side profile with a big belly, either like a well-known strong man or something like that. And it says, this is the shape of peak performance. You might not like it. I don't remember the exact wording.
Yeah, I've seen those with more the making fun of those memes. I think one in particular that always sticks out to me is this guy Sebastian Murphy. He's the singer of this band Viagra Boys, and he's always shirtless and he's not in good shape at all. And they use it in that context, and that to me is like where that makes sense. But yeah, it's always But yeah, I've seen more of it in comedically now because I think people have kind of seen the absurdity of that specific meme and just sort of started ripping on it.
But I think it always is, or usually is meant comedically, but there seems like there's a sense of a kernel of truth to it, right? Because we can
Mhm.
think of athletes who are huge, but like undeniably strong and powerful. And so one of the things that makes this, I guess, sort of hard to reconcile is that, it's also quite common for, coaches and athletes to talk about how, these athletes have poor recovery and tolerate a relatively low or, have relatively low work capacity. And so, how do you square that with this being sort of how you achieve peak performance in strength and power sports? And so, in my experience, when you hear about this, people talking about why they have this low work capacity and why they recover slowly from session to session, and that's something that's topic of this podcast. Um, you get these hand wavy explanations, and some of the ones that I hear most often are it's because they lift a higher absolute load,
Yeah,
which
that's
for
usually
anyone
what I
paying
hear too.
attention it doesn't really mean anything when you turn your mind to it. It implies, I guess, that, strength doesn't scale or the tissues in your body, their mechanical strength doesn't scale in a linear way. So as you get heavier, your weight increases or, the weight of everything increases faster than the strength of the material generating the force. So, muscles, tendons, ligaments, bones and all that. Another big one is, fatty tissue competes for blood supply. So this is, eating up their ability to recover because they can't get, adequate nutrients and oxygen in or remove waste material quickly enough. And then I guess the other one is, they have to move their own mass, which I don't actually think is really the culprit, but at least that makes a kind of sense, right? Like there's
That's the one I've heard
actually,
the most, typically.
yeah.
Because it's
Okay.
just it goes back to our volume, our volume podcast that we did. But it's
Yeah.
just a, greater volume going up a flight of stairs is going to result in greater hypertrophy. So that is the one I typically have heard of the most.
Okay. I think the one I've heard the most is the higher absolute load. And again, it's never with an explanation, just
Mhm.
like I said, hand wavy and asking, oh, the higher absolute loads.
Sure.
Having to
Yeah.
carry your own body mass around. I mean, that's real.
Mhm.
Ask, you don't see a lot of super heavyweight athletes doing pull-ups, right? Because a lot of that weight is dead weight. That adipose tissue is not helping you pull up. I mean, even if you have muscular legs, it's not helping you do pull-ups either.
No.
But that's not usually, in my experience, what's holding people back. All right. So before we get into it, we're going to sort of back up a little bit, do some definitions, or at least, clarify what exactly it is we're trying to say. So what do we mean by this relative low work capacity? So you alluded to in a previous episode, I think it's episode 11, we spent some time discussing the idea of volume load, how to measure it, why it's important to your training. And so very briefly, you can think of volume load as, in the case of lifting weights, the, product of sets and reps and weight. So, 5 sets times 10 reps times 100 kilos gives you, what did I say, 5 times 10, 50 times 100. So 5,000 kilos would be your measure of that. And that would be your volume load. It's not the only way to track volume load, but, it's pretty good. It's what most people use. And at any rate, it, I guess illustrates our point that we're trying to make here. So when you look at these, supersized athletes, it's common for volume load of their training to be less than you would expect for how big and strong they are. That this is, a reflection of this relative low work capacity that we're referring to, right? So the link between volume load and work capacity and overall like strength and ability to perform are all, linked up pretty closely. And so you would expect for the weights they lift for them to be able to perform more work, and the ability to perform more work should drive their performance. So another piece is, when we're discussing slower recovery of these athletes, like when I say slow recovery, we're talking about two things. First is, the recovery between sets or exercises. It doesn't have to be lifting. If you think again to that line then of the oxygen mask, trying to sort of catch their breath after a play within a session. So that's like, your workout or your game or, the event you're competing at, that set to set or play to play recovery time. That's the first thing. So the second is the session to session recovery. So this is, how long it takes you to recover from today's session, whether it's tomorrow, the next day, or today's game or today's competition. How long does it take you to bounce back from that and be ready to either play again, practice again, or train again? Okay, so another piece of this is that it's common for coaches to prescribe fewer maximal or near maximal lifts for these athletes based on the observation, as we mentioned, that they take longer to recover. And this is where I think I most often hear this absolute load argument, right? Like, why do these supers or, very big athletes take so long to recover from, their maximal lifts? And the thing that I hear most is, well, the absolute load is higher. And this goes back, if you think about it, or it invokes, I guess, this idea or the argument that, there's something different once you get to certain weights, like the way, muscle tissue or ligaments behave. It's a non-linear relationship. As they get
Yeah.
bigger, strength doesn't increase linearly, or, something changes, and we'll get to it. But this doesn't actually seem to be true. And, people in
No.
biomechanics that look at, muscle cross-sectional area or tendon or ligament cross-sectional area and characterize like really like basic science, mechanical properties of these tissues, find that's not in fact the case. But,
Yeah.
all right. So to tie this all together, since we know that volume, load, and relative intensity, so how heavy you're training, are two of the most important variables of a strength athlete's training, it should be clear that we want to maximize or at least optimize these two variables, right? Stated another way, if we can identify the cause of this low work capacity and address it, we should be able to produce better athletes. Does that sound reasonable?
I think that sounds very reasonable. I think that there's just sort of to kind of come back to this point, we have a tendency, especially in North America here, of speaking about American football athletes and thinking about big athletes. But when we have European listeners, when they think of big athletes who have to push people around, they might think of forwards and props in particular in rugby, and they have a very different idea of what work capacity is, even though they're very big and strong as well, because they have to just run nonstop for 90 minutes. So it is, for me, it's just kind of interesting because they're big, they're built, they're not usually as big bellied because they just can't be. They have less adiposity. Just the amount of running they have to move like soccer players and they have to move people around like football players. They have to sprint as well. So it is really interesting, and I'm curious to see if there's any kind of comparisons with work capacity of athletes of even equal weight who are bigger within the sports. I doubt there is because study seems very specific, but uh, but I have a sneaking suspicion that rugby would win out in that case.
Yeah, I mean, they put out huge volumes of work, right? And especially when you consider the size of, like you said, the props and stuff. These aren't delicately built people, right? Like both the
No.
men and women, they're quite sturdy.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to offer a counter explanation for
Hmm.
what's going on with these athletes, and that will inform our third episode. And that's, what do you do about it? Or how do you adjust training and nutrition and everything to accommodate this situation? So first, most of the explanations that, we just went through, they don't really make sense. They don't hold up to scrutiny. So for example, and I already sort of touched on this, that the higher absolute load argument, this is a common one. This implies that there's a non-linear relationship or property of muscle strength, or that they start behaving differently, like these tissues start behaving differently, above a certain scale. So they don't scale up well. For example, maybe when people get above a certain size, muscle size increases faster than tendon or ligament strength, right? This isn't a bad guess, but it is a guess. And the thing about
Hmm.
guesses is that they're only guesses until we can test them. And, these are things that have been tested. So what does the data actually say? And in short, it doesn't support the guess. Like I said before, in fact, biomechanists, tough one to say,
Nice.
have demonstrated that the strength of muscle, ligaments, and tendons scale quite linearly with size. So as a tendon gets thicker, the amount there's a linear relationship between tendon thickness and its strength, and that is preserved as things get thicker. And in fact, under training, they tend to get stronger for the cross-sectional area. And the
Mhm.
same holds true for muscle, right? As muscle gets thicker, it gets, and especially in response to strength training, not only does the strength per cross-sectional area increase in lockstep with the size, but it actually at some point tends to actually get stronger than you would expect. So this is not the case. This doesn't play out.
Are there any exceptions to this?
Yeah, and I think I know what you're getting at, right? So with anabolic androgenetic steroid use, there's some evidence. And again, the evidence in this is always sort of hard to look at because there aren't a whole lot of good, randomized trials on, how quickly people get injured when you're on anabolic androgenetic steroids, because that's never going to get approved by any ethics committee. But, the evidence does suggest that, there's a possibility for the muscle strength to outstrip ligament strength, especially at higher doses, and that this can lead to a higher incidence of ligament tears, and tearing ligaments right off an insertion with the bone, because these things take a little longer to get stronger and don't respond the same way to super duper crazy high doses of hormones that should not be kicking around your body at such high doses.
That would be a very funny study. No, seriously, you can probably put another 90 kilos on top of your PR from last week. It's fine.
That's good. We're just going to give you 3 grams of testosterone a week
Yeah.
and push you super hard and see what
Yeah.
happens. Although I guess that's what the enhanced games is. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Christ. The more that, and we got to do like a follow-up episode on that shit show, because
Is
it's
it
too
still
damn
like, I
stupid.
don't know. I keep seeing people being added and talking about it, but it all just seems like hogwash.
Yeah, I mean, it's trundling along, but it's not, it's not a real event or real. I mean, if you have one person per event or like 3 people per event and they're across different weight divisions, and it's not a sporting event. It's just like it's a circus, right?
Yeah, that's
It's
exactly
an
what it is.
exhibition, and they're gonna like
I
spin off supplements or something. It's just a grift.
Yeah, it's not interesting. I would say strongman's interesting. I love strongman, and that to me is just a lot more fun.
Yeah, but strongman's for the most part already not drug tested. So it's,
No,
I
of
think
course not.
actually didn't
Yeah.
like the Hafthor Bjornsson guy join Enhanced Games?
No, I don't think so. I mean, what is he going to join? I don't think so. I think he's
Well, I
just
don't know what the events are for one. I'll double check that. Maybe why don't you Google that while we're talking and search that up. So you're telling me he's not on drugs now? Like, am I supposed to believe that? But anyway, I just find it. So he's just going to keep doing what he is, and good for him, get a paycheck. Anyway, so I'm gonna move on. You raise your hand when you get our answer here. So I don't want to go into any of the other explanations, just because I don't want this turning into a myth busting episode. Problem with myth busting is that it lends credibility to dumb nonsense. Also, coming up with nonsense is easy, and they can always come up with nonsense. All right, faster than we can systematically refute nonsense. All right, so Schwartz, you got your hand up. What's going on?
Yeah, so apparently he's going to compete. You're right. You seem to be more in tune with pop culture than me. My goodness, good for you.
Had to happen eventually.
Wow, it only took how many decades? He's going to compete in the inaugural Enhanced Games at the Resorts Worlds in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, as we know, for a lot of legitimate competitions and venues and stuff. He's going to aim to break his own 510 kilogram deadlift world record. So this is a circus because it's not like it's a competition.
Yeah.
He's just showing up to break a world record. And it's like, yeah, I can actually take drugs this time. So Thor, you're going to have to really break that world record.
Does he compete in a drug tested?
No, he competes at strongman.
So how's this any? Again, good for him. I don't.
Yeah, of course, he's strong as hell.
Get your paycheck, but don't try to pitch this as something interesting. Like, your dude's already clearly geared up, and now he's just going to be geared up in a different league. Like,
if I remember correctly, in strongman there was one they tested. I don't know if you remember Marusz Pudzianowski. He's like the most winning strongman ever. He's just like,
is he Polish?
Yeah, he was the Polish guy who had abs and he was like 300 pounds and he was just creaming guys. It was awesome. And I think the one time there was like a positive drug test was him, but it wasn't steroids, it was cocaine, which means he had to do it like during the competition, which I thought was
Oh,
pretty awesome.
I was gonna say he's just like standing around talking to people and talking and talking and talking, and they're like, okay, this guy's definitely on code. This won't
Yeah,
shut up
I'm
about
getting
like this.
exhausted listening, and he's just like doing lines and doing the Atlas stones. I mean,
He's
it's
like,
a
oh,
long competition.
did I even tell you guys about my like DJing? I think he really into DJing. Blah, 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 blah. All right, this guy's on coke. But I mean, I know that there are, before we get angry emails or whatever it is people communicate with, angry comments in the comment section. Like I know that there are drug tested, strong man, strong
But
woman
yeah,
competitions now, and I think that's great. He's not in those, so we'll just
no.
set that aside. That's what I'm talking about.
I think the
All right,
strongman
so
recently posted something about that. But anyways, I'll digress. Move on. I'm
I
completely
know,
derailing.
but we do have to do a
Yeah.
Enhanced Games follow up episode, I think, because I don't know, it's just fun. All right, so instead of, like I said, going through a Mythbuster line by line, someone said this is an explanation. That's not it, because XYZ. We're going to offer a counter explanation, and that's that these super heavyweight athletes often are just in poor condition because they suffer from overweight and obesity. In other words, they're just not in very good shape. So what's my evidence, and how does it explain the observed low work capacity and recovery ability of these athletes? All right. So, evidence. When people engage in long-term training regimes, they experience muscle hypertrophy. We all know this, right? Like the muscles grow. This is well established. What's becoming more apparent with recent research is that not only do muscles grow bigger with training, but they also grow more dense, right? So you get more, contractile protein per, cross-sectional area, however, anatomical cross-sectional area when you cut perpendicular to the direction of the sarcomeres, little contractile bits. You get more of them packed in there. This is thought to occur through what's called sarcomere splitting. So you actually get more sarcomeres, they get bigger, they just get more packed in. And so the muscle itself is actually denser. There's more contractile force producing bits for every little bit of muscle. And this takes a while, but this seems to be what's happening. So for those of you who like big words, this is referred to as increased myofibular density. So this goes towards explaining what we've all observed, where some people, especially those who've been training a long time, are stronger than they look, right? You see these athletes and it's been offered up in the past as an explanation for why, just genetically some people are so much stronger while being the same size as, their peers. And it's just this, that some people have innately more dense musculature, like on the microscopic level. So this is what we want. This is what we get. But when looking at overweight and obese athletes, this isn't really what we see, especially as we start heading more towards the obesity end of the spectrum. So what you end up getting is you get sort of, I don't want to say this in too wordy a way, but you get fat tissue deposited within the muscle. It's, ectopic fatty deposits or intrusions of fatty tissue,
Marbling.
which can be called. Yeah. So when you to visualize this, think of a steak, right? Just like a regular old steak, cut it and you look inside, you cut against the grain and you look at it and there's, you can see the muscle fibers actually, or, you can see the packing of the contractile tissue. You can see some ligaments, and then you can see usually little fat intrusions in it, like the marbling. And typically the yummier, more expensive steaks have more marbling. Anyone who has never had like a Wagyu beef, just Google Wagyu beef image. And so this is a type of cattle originating in Japan that has a genetic mutation that causes like extensive fat deposits within the muscle tissue. And, I don't think this is what most overweight obese athletes demonstrate, but it's the same idea where you actually get muscle packed within the fibers. And it's not good. And it's the opposite of what we want to see. So it's, it's the opposite of, our aforementioned increase in myofibular density, right? So for each, cubic centimeter or square centimeter, less of it's going to be contractile tissue, more of it's going to be muscle.
Mhm.
But I don't want to bog people down with the jargon. So we're just going to call this, intramuscular fat deposits, IMAT, which stands for intramuscular adipose tissue. IMAT.
There is, I believe, there are. This is an adaptation that does happen with some endurance athletes, high level endurance athletes, where they get marbling. But the difference is that they have the enzymes necessary to actually utilize those, and they use them. So if you're running like a marathon, you're going to end up using as much fat as you possibly can, including that within the tissue. But it is different and distinct from the kind of marbling that we're talking about. Intramyocellular lipids is, I believe, the term that's used.
Yes, and that's a really good point, actually. And we should probably do an episode on that, because that is interesting.
It's very cool.
And it parallels what you see with glycogen storage within muscles too, and some of the research in the past couple of years on that, where
Hmm.
even within individual cells, there's a bias towards, or a bias in, or a hierarchy, I guess, not a bias, in which glycogen stores contracting muscles use. And then this can be extended up to fat. So we should do that. Actually, that is an interesting. It's a good point, and it's an interesting example of a distinction that is a difference, because it's not the same thing. It's not what we're talking about. All right. So first thing this does, reduces your myofibular density, right? So the muscles are big; they're not as strong for their size. So it's the first observation. Another issue with this is it reduces capillary density. So capillaries, for those who don't know, these are the smallest of your blood vessels. And these are the teeny tiny blood vessels that run up alongside individual muscle fibers and perfuse all through the muscle tissue, delivering oxygen and glucose and whatever else your working muscles need, while simultaneously carrying away carbon dioxide, reducing, cellular acidosis and other waste material, so that you can keep exercising. So, and this is because, of course, fatty tissue has very low vascularization, right? It has very small blood supply, which goes back to, again, not to myth bust, but the previous explanation people provide sometimes of the fat is using up some of the blood supply, and it's not the case. It's it's getting in the way of good perfusion,
Yes.
but it is not actually like shunting blood away from a muscular tissue. And this final one, or another piece, I guess, is mechanically this fat intrusion, this adipose tissue within the muscle, the IMAT, could impair shortening mechanics, reducing power and strength. So essentially, oh, you doing okay?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yep.
It's fine. You're coughing. They'll probably end up editing that out anyway. People wonder when I'm talking.
I tried to mute it, but I couldn't get there in time. Sorry, it's just the liquid
That's
went
right.
through the wrong hole. It
That's all right.
happens.
As long as it's one of the top holes. See a previous episode on butt chugging.
Butt chugging. Yeah. Hey.
No, you should not do that.
Well, I wouldn't have a coughing fit if that was the case.
It's true.
I'd have a different kind of fit.
I hope not. I'm sure it's intention.
How many podcasts can we do with the word butt and chug together?
All right. So this intrusive fat tissue can also interfere with just the sliding mechanics of the muscle, right? So it's ideally, muscles, they shorten, they have a nice shortening velocity that, is the same as or less than the shortening velocity of the individual sarcomeres. And you don't have it bogged down by non-shortening material like, fatty tissue. And so that's another reason you don't want this intramuscular, fat deposits just gumming up the works, as it were. And then, so I guess finally we have, this intramuscular fatty tissue. The past couple of decades, we've seen a lot of work on, a lot of research into inflammation and, these markers of chronic inflammation, and how this is associated with, constellation of negative health outcomes. And so this IMAT, this intramuscular fatty tissue, is strongly associated with that. So this is the kind of fatty tissue that releases, adipokines, these short distance messenger molecules that elicit inflammatory responses and overall not great for muscular function or health in general. All right, so now we have a situation where muscles in individuals with overweight and obesity have low capillary density, which reduces blood supply. Lower blood supply means less oxygen and nutrients coming in, and slower removal of metabolic waste and CO2, which can hamper for performance. Plus, we have a relative low strength due to decreased density of force-producing proteins, and disrupted mechanics due to fat intrusion in the muscle itself. And on top of all of this, we have the potential for increased systemic inflammation due to metabolic effects of these intramuscular fat deposits, which can directly hamper, insulin sensitivity and other things that you need to work well in order to recover properly. Does that all make sense? What do you think?
I think so. Yeah.
All right.
It's not a great situation if you're looking for recovery and
No,
performance.
exactly. We all are, right?
Yeah.
That's like the whole model for training. It's like train, recover, stress, recover. It's the whole thing. Okay, so fiber types. This is another piece. And we discussed, again, we touched on this in the last episode, not in any great detail. So let's talk a little bit about fiber types. And I feel like we're sort of past peak fiber type concern. It used to be that, like a couple decades ago, that you couldn't talk to any coach or athlete with, about exercise and training without someone bringing up the topic of fiber types. And, people couch it in language like, oh, he's really twitchy, or she's really twitchy, or she's got lots of slow twitch muscle fibers, or he's got lots of fast twitch fibers.
Or
And
concerned
there's
about
been a bit of
training
move.
modalities as well. Like
Yeah.
I'm specific to this sport, and I don't want there's muscles that are going to differentiate into either slow twitch or fast twitch, and I don't want to do too many reps because all of a sudden get slow. It's like that's not what's going to make you slow. I remember this. This was
Oh, yeah.
very hot. Yeah.
Yeah. And this was, we all parroted this. I remember saying stuff like that. And so, there's been a move away from that. And I think
Mhm.
that's good. But I also think sometimes, like with a lot of these things, swing too far the other way and the baby goes out with the bathwater. Muscle fiber type is still important. It's still interesting. And so we're going to talk about it here because it has some unique, characteristics of muscle fibers in people with overweight and obesity. And that extends to athletes as well. There's also some interesting subtleties in terms of gene expression. We're not going to really get into that, but I think it's super interesting, and maybe we'll do an episode on it, and maybe people will even listen to it. Maybe a little technical, but I think it's super interesting, super fun. I really like the gene regulatory stuff.
You're a
That's like
gene
my
guy. That
background.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my jam. It's just cool. All right, but for now, we're going to look at a simplified model because for us, that's holds true, right? And that's that you have two basic fiber types or broad fiber types. And this isn't perfect, but you've got, your fast twitch fiber types or, your type 1 fibers, and you've got your slow twitch, which are type 1. And you've got your fast twitch, which is your type 2. And then within your fast twitch, there's these two subgroups, basically. Not strictly the case, but it's basically true. The first is your type 2A. And this is what most people have most of, including athletes. Like when you talk about your fast muscle fibers, they contract quickly, they contract forcefully, and they've got some sort of oxidative capacity, run out of gas like immediately. You also have type 2X. These contract faster and they can contract a little more forcefully. And so you would think that you want tons of the type 2X. Ironically or paradoxically, this isn't the case because there's a few things with these type X fibers. One, they fatigue very, very quickly. They have very little oxidative capacity, meaning that they can't use oxygen very well. So they just run out of juice. The other is that they're weirdly fragile. So when you look at muscle fibers that express a lot of this type 2X protein, which is what leads to us calling the entire fiber a type 2X fiber, they're more prone to damage and rupture from training. And so it's kind of it's sort of this weird situation. And what you actually see is that the people who have the highest proportion of these type 2X fibers are people with low physical conditioning. And so people who are out of shape, people who don't engage in a lot of activity. And you also see it, or you see them overexpressed because everyone has some of them and that's fine, but they're overrepresented in people with overweight and obesity. Um, so yeah, it's sort of a strange thing. And I think it gets the question, what the hell are these fibers for? Which we can get into. It would be speculative, but again, I think that's another episode. The same one I was just referring to, but it's cool because where do you see these fibers? You see it in people who have joints immobilized. So if you break your arm and you get a cast that like immobilizes your elbow, for instance, you'll see an increase in these type 2X muscle fibers by the end of, if you have this cast on for 4 or 6 weeks. Or, people who suffer from paralysis. So if you have a spinal cord injury and you lose the ability to move your legs, you see an increased expression of these type 2X fibers.
It's an actual expression. It's not just the proportion because the other ones have decreased.
Yeah, no, you get an increased proportion of these type
Interesting.
2X.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird stuff.
Yeah.
Or, people who go into space, people who spend time in, low Earth orbit. I've never met anyone who's been to low Earth orbit, not even like at an event. So this is the ultimate edge case, but it's still interesting, right? Like if you don't use your muscles, you get this overexpression of these type 2X fibers.
Is it just like a fail safe, sort of a backup until you get the other fibers up and running? Maybe it's metabolically less costly to make. I don't know. I'm
I don't
not
know.
even. Yeah.
That's not a terrible guess.
Hmm.
And I think probably what it is that, there's like your individual muscle fibers or cells actually express all three of these fibers to some degree. And it's like a proportionality of which is expressed determines the shortening characteristics of that fiber. And so I suspect that some amount of these type 2X fibers is good and, serves a purpose. Too much is problematic. Again, speculating because nobody's really sure what's going on with these, but it's an interesting question. I actually sort of like your like metabolic parsimony model, which is what I've decided to just name it.
I like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Naming things is
Yeah.
fun. So, and I alluded to this before, what you actually see in super heavyweight athletes is, in fact, an overexpression of these type 2X fibers.
Hmm.
And so instead of, some people might say,
Interesting.
oh, well, you're selecting for people with these type X fibers because they're strength and power athletes. So they overexpress these very quickly shortening fibers. But it turns out that these fibers actually don't predict performance. So if you look at people with, so if you take, population sample of people with, and we'll have, references in the show notes. I've given up on citing material during talking because nobody wants to hear that. They can just go to the show notes. If you, look at a population of people, those expressing higher levels of the type 2X, it's actually more predictive of overweight and obesity in the future than it is of athletic or power performance. So yeah, there you go. So you don't want a lot of these, it turns out.
No.
And you tend to see a lot of them in overweight and obese athletes, as well as, non-athletes or just regular trainees or people who, have overweight and obesity and are active. And so like we said, these fibers, they tire very quickly. They have very low oxidative capacity. They tend to damage quite easily, which will also affect. So now we have two things affecting recovery, right? We have the first, they tire out very quickly. So you use them and then you're out of gas and you're trying to, pay back your oxygen debt. And then they get damaged easily. So your session to session recovery is also lower because, turning over a few proteins is easier than repairing a damaged or like a damaged sarcomere or even a ruptured cell membrane.
Do we roughly know what versus lean athletes, like how much more of this fiber type athletes with obesity would have?
Yeah, not off the top of my head. I mean, muscle fiber type proportion stuff is always tricky business.
Yeah.
Partly by virtue of how it's measured. But it's intrinsically intrusive.
Hmm.
You have to take a biopsy of the muscle, then you get it out, or you're actually just taking you're taking an average of all the cell types that you put the biopsy syringe through or needle through. And again, we can go into that a bit, but it's actually, it's not easy to measure. And I certainly couldn't quote report. I mean, I'm not a muscle fiber type researcher, right? Like I couldn't quote those numbers off the top of my head, just that they are higher. And when
Just
we do an
it's curious
episode
to me
on
because
that,
it's like a chicken and egg thing for me.
yeah, well, and I think that that's where it's the research on, or the data showing that it's predictive of overweight and obesity kind of answers that, and it's that this comes first typically, or it's the result of being out of shape. So it's indicative of a sedentary lifestyle.
Were they? I mean, how did they do the studies? I'd have to look at this. Maybe you have a better idea. But it was a perspective, was a cross sectional. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's another episode.
Very. Yeah.
We're getting
Yeah.
flower
This
fit.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sorry. This would be a great episode.
I think it'd be really fun. But what it seems to show is that sedentary lifestyle, you get more X fibers, type 2X.
Mhm.
They're not like the super speed power fibers we'd like them to be, or that they might superficially sound like at first blush. So that's just like to review. So taken together, an overabundance of these type 2X fibers, they're not a strength and power bonus, right? Instead, they result in low work capacity, slower within session recovery, and slower between session recovery, likely because of their susceptibility to damage. So the low oxidative capacity, they can't contract very long before running out of energy. Also means they take longer to recover between sets. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we covered it, right? And so I'd actually really like, and you touched on this, to see more research into, what the function of these type 2X fibers is. Like, why do we, like, they're for something, right?
Obviously.
Whether it's
Yeah.
like your, what did I call parsimonious?
Parsimonious. Metabolic. You called it
Metabolic
metabolic
parsimony model.
parsimony. Yeah. That's it.
So whether it's that, like this is just something that, doesn't take much energy. It's like the low output version that we keep around for when we're immobilized, like when we go to space. Or is it just that, having a bit of them is good, but too much is less good? Because otherwise, evolution would have called these outer genes a long time ago. But they're well preserved. Everyone's got them. They're doing something. But it'd be cool. I'd be interested in more research in that. I'm not sure how much attention it gets. I'm sure it is, but all right. So this brings us to our next reason our next explanatory piece for why overweight and obese athletes and trainees have lower work capacity and poor recovery. And that is obstructive sleep apnea. So for those who don't know, this is when you're sleeping and, you start choking or stop breathing and you jerk awake. That's like the easiest way to understand it. So what causes this is the muscles in your throat and neck and tongue relax during sleep. There's a few causes for this, but then if you're lying on your back, those muscles relax, your tongue and your throat sort of lull back and collapse into your throat, blocking the airway. Stop breathing for a couple seconds and, you jerk awake because you're like, I'm not breathing. As you might guess, this is very disruptive to the sleep cycle. Yeah. And I think it still does surprise people when they realize sort of how strongly effective, until you start realizing how frequently this happens to people who have it. So in, severe cases, you can have, you can be woken up by this up to, 30 times an hour.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
That is
serious. Yeah.
That is bad sleep. Like if you imagine someone,
that's not even sleep.
Every minute or two, someone sort of gives you a poke that kind of wakes you up a bit that you don't remember. And that's also a hallmark of this, is you fall back asleep right away. You don't remember. And you're like, no, I slept all night. Why do I feel like shit? It's because your sleep is garbage. And so this is something that, coworkers with overweight and obesity, like at a very high rate. Like this is a big deal for people with overweight and obesity, including athletes. So, and this is linked with multiple comorbidities, including our favorite, a constellation of symptoms known collectively as metabolic syndrome. It can affect, your recovery. It can affect cognitive function. It can affect, insulin sensitivity. It's bad. You need to sleep well. Like this, you don't sleep well, things go badly. I mean, you see the same thing in people who, work shift work for years, like the studies they've done with nurses who do shift work. And turns out it's terrible for you. All right. So that said, so it's considerable work showing that overweight and obese athletes are far more likely to suffer sleep apnea than both leaner athletes and non-athletes, like leaner non-athletes. So among athletes, there are a number of misunderstandings, though, around what the causes of sleep apnea and neck size. So have you heard any of this? Okay, so for the people, neck size correlates with sleep apnea. Bigger your neck size, the higher the incidence of sleep apnea. And I remember when I first read about this, maybe I would say like 15 years ago. Do you remember sort of people's knee-jerk response? And especially in like the powerlifting community, I saw this a lot.
Yeah, I got a huge neck and I don't have sleep apnea because it's muscle. But I think this is like the whole BMI thing again. It's like most people that have huge necks, they're not doing harness exercises.
Yeah, it's not your huge traps that are causing sleep apnea, right? Like that's the piece. And I remember people, this is going back, so it was on like message boards and forums, right? People like, oh, I've got like a 23-inch neck, and that's just like, it's just because I'm so jacked, and that's why I have sleep apnea. I'm like, well, some people just have sleep apnea for overweight, obesity related reasons, but that's not what we're talking about. So, one of the clinical screening tools for sleep apnea is neck diameter. And particularly when used with waist diameter and blood oxygen levels during sleep, is a very strong predictor of sleep apnea. As we alluded to, I remember when I first became aware of this, there was a lot of sort of scoffing from, the online community about like, oh yeah, I'm just so jacked, that's why I have sleep apnea. And again, this is wishful thinking. Like, I wish this were true, right? It's like, I would be happy if this were true. It's sort of like the red meat thing. I would be happy if red meat was like amazing for me. I'm not a vegan. I love red meat. It's delicious. I wish it wouldn't give me colon cancer. All right. So your thick muscular neck is not causing sleep apnea. What's happening is that the adipose tissue in around the tongue and on the front of the neck is pushing down on your throat, and it's weighing it all that down when you're sleeping on your back, and it's choking you in your sleep.
It's not your jacked sternocleidomastoids.
It's not.
Tissue. Yeah,
exactly. It's not. Yeah. It's not your neck harness exercises. It's not your super muscular tongue. It's your fat neck.
My tongue push-ups every day.
Yeah. I should have done that.
Won't sleep tonight.
So what they're measuring with a neck diameter or neck circumference is adiposity, right? They're using this as a proxy for overweight and obesity. That's why the correlation improves when you pair it with waist circumference. And again, this is a screening tool for population. Yeah, some people have huge muscular necks and don't have sleep apnea because they're also lean. But if you're honest with yourself, look in the mirror, put your chin down, and like this is, and I guess the final piece in this, and again, the citation will be in the show notes, is that this also applies to kids, right? So prepubescent kids who do not have, androgen-related musculature of the neck development, right? Because especially in men, one of the things you see is development of the neck and trapezial musculature during puberty. But if you take this waist and neck circumference screening tool and you apply it to prepubescent kids, boys and girls, it still works pretty well. So it is, in fact, that this is a proxy for adiposity, and that this is, in fact, what, at the heart of obstructive sleep apnea in the instance where it's not. There's other reasons you can have sleep apnea, but so it's not good.
No. I think this is one of the bigger factors of detriment to performance. I don't know. Do we just start giving, as a short-term solution, athletes CPAP machines or recommending it to them, like bigger athletes? Or
well, I think that's a really good. And I was discussing this at lunch actually with Michelle, and I think as a first pass, it's not the solution. I mean, ideally, the solution is that you become leaner, not just for performance, but because it's good for your health. And we would like everyone who listens to this show to not to succumb to the
But your training
comorbidities
capacity
associated with
to
overweight and
become
obesity.
leaner, your training capacity to become leaner could improve with the CPAP machine. It's like one of those things where you get a kickstart, like for example, with GLP-1 agonists to lose weight. It could be a way to kickstart.
Oh, absolutely. And I believe one of
Hmm.
the approved applications, like for prescribing GLP-1, is for obstructive sleep apnea.
Hmm.
You'd want to double check that. I'm not a physician, but I believe that is one of the approved uses. But yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it would take very little sort of deductive reasoning to arrive where you are, right? Like again, when you look at research into shift workers, one of the things that appears over and over is that people who work shift work long term have an increased incidence of overweight and obesity. And it's because their sleep is all fucked up for years and years, and it affects
It's
how
a
your body
vicious
works.
cycle. Yeah, it's a vicious
Yeah.
cycle. Yeah.
And I mean, even, short term sleep deprivation, one of the things you see is dysregulation of blood sugar, right? And people's appetites, like right away, you get an increase in appetite, you take away sleep, people eat more calories just automatically without even thinking of it. People can talk about the reason why, or what makes you feel like you're getting more energy, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. Result is consistent. People sleep less, people sleep poorly, they eat more.
Yeah.
Like it's not,
Yeah.
this isn't complicated. Similarly, recovery, like going back to recovery piece, like if you're, like you just said, I think this is huge. Like if you're an athlete with overweight and obesity, and people will like spend tons of money on supplements and on massage and on whatever drugs, hokey pseudoscience therapies to improve recovery. Probably the single biggest thing you can do is get a good night's sleep. So I have a very difficult time buying the idea that in order to get as strong as possible, you need to get as big as possible, like at all costs. And that's just the price you pay to play at that level. Like I just like, first off, I mean, not first off, but there's also, the counterexample of super heavy athletes who are not, don't have overweight or obesity. And there's lots of them. And like you
Oh, yeah.
mentioned before, in boxing, you see them in,
Anthony
from time to
Joshua.
time
Yeah.
in,
And fighting,
yeah,
like a lot of fight
weightlifting.
sports, weightlifting. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, you see it. And a lot of them are huge, but they aren't all huge. And if you look at them at the biggest in their career, it's often not when they're putting up their biggest weights. Same in powerlifting. And I'm glad to see that, there's more athletes, I think, taking this to heart. And again, I'm glad that, sorry, bro.
I was just thinking with weightlifting, Lasha. He's a bigger athlete with obesity, but he's also the strongest, I think, ever with his numbers.
It's the biggest clean and jerk in competition ever.
Yeah, and
But if you
snatch
look at
too,
his
wasn't it?
body weight,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
225
That's
kilo snatch, which
absolutely
is
absurd. Just
one
absurd.
of my best squats. Was back squats is 225. Yeah, it's hard to understand. But his best lifts weren't at his heaviest,
No, no, they were
right?
not.
And anyway, so for the athlete who thinks that, and again, this isn't a criticism of athletes with overweight and obesity. Like if anything, if something like this is your segue into athletics, awesome, but long term for your health, and I think a very good argument for your performance, you don't want to be like unnecessarily or carrying unnecessary amounts of adipose tissue. It's bad for your health and it's bad for your performance. And I think the case is compelling, right? Like it's almost for sure that you're not sleeping well. You've got the sort of more mechanistic physiological explanations we gave before, which I know mechanistic explanations sometimes are out of fashion these days, but
Which is
like when they're
strange to
good,
me.
they're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think people have gone too far with them, right? Like they overextend. Like they take here's this mechanism. Now I'm going to take like 4 or 5 steps ahead with it. And so, but we're not doing that. We're just looking at like,
Hmm.
yeah, muscles don't contract as well, and there's fat intruding inside them, or recover as well when you've got too much of these X. fibers. Oh, who has those? People with overweight and obesity. You don't have to, like, we're not making too many deductive leaps, and that's why I think that leaning on the mechanistic data in this instance is still pretty sound. All right, so where does this all leave us? Yeah, where does this leave us? Superheavy athletes' work capacity can be attributed to sedentary lifestyle, overweight, and obesity, and not just not being in very good shape. This might be a tough sell for some people. I think particularly given the the extraordinary feats of strength, like you said, like Lasha have achieved, and some of these athletes really do extraordinary things. However, this explanation does make sense based on what we know about physiology, and it's borne out in the research. Not just us, like I said, like doing weird mechanistic extrapolations. So instead of leaning on nonsense explanation, like it's a higher absolute weight, or it's because you're carrying your own mass, just an athlete should understand that the poor work capacity of super heavyweight athletes is likely the result of poor muscle quality, low capillary density, robbing tissue of oxygen and nutrients, inefficient waste removal from muscle, chronic inflammation, and chronic poor sleep quality. All right, so apart from the obvious health reasons, why should athletes care? I mean, hopefully it's clear from this argument that by addressing overweight and obesity, you should be able to train harder, recover faster, and ultimately achieve higher levels of performance, have fewer injuries, which didn't really get into, but there's a whole narrative on that. And like be healthier and hopefully live longer and more happily, right? Like that's not nothing, right? Like,
No, that's something.
All right. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this is the 3-part series. This was part 2. And in the third upcoming episode next week, we're going to focus on how do you address overweight and obesity in athletes, or even just, your casual trainee. How do you manage what I'm, especially in the short term, feel like, goals that are at odds with each other, like, a calorie deficit and improving performance. And so that's what we're going to get into in the nutrition and training approaches and lifestyle management that goes into that in the next episode. All right. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I'm looking forward to the next episode because I want to talk about what we think the ultimate solution is or the best strategy. I also had a tangential thought based on the tangent that you made me go off of with
Ooh,
enhanced
I like
games and
tangents.
TDs. Ooh, so okay. This is juicy. And I knew I saw this earlier and I didn't click on it before when I was on YouTube. A couple of days ago, it was released. I think I'm a little more versed in strongman than you are. I don't want to make any assumptions, but
No, it's a
one
safe assumption.
so I think one of the strongest men in the world is actually a guy from around here called Mitchell Hooper. He's
Nice. I knew that.
Canadian. Yep. And Mitchell 2 days ago released a YouTube video called "World's Strongest Man PED Stack Reveal" in all caps. So he's
Okay,
talking about the
PED, for those who don't know.
performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah.
And so he's actually announcing, I'm just reading, I haven't watched it yet, but it's time for full transparency. Here it is, my actual performance enhancing stack that I've been using and the changes I'm making going into the enhanced games. So I guess there might be, maybe there's going to be strongman in the enhanced games. These substances are not being provided by enhanced games. My position, the position of the enhanced games, is that any and all substances should be prescribed by a medical professional. And then he's got a whole bunch of links and the video, which I will send to you, Alex, afterwards. But that's the juicy goss update over here.
Nice. Actually, that reminds me, and I just again, remember Hugo Girard?
I do.
Was,
Yeah.
from Gatineau when
I
you and I
remember
both lived in Ottawa.
Jessen Paulin, who I trained with a couple of times, a really nice guy, the big dude that trained with Hugo was his competitor.
Yeah, so I was going to go. But he is like one of the biggest people I've met in person.
Hugo, yeah, I'm not even surprised.
Like just the scale of these guys, I think, is sometimes hard to understand. Like big and muscular, sure, I've met plenty of big muscular people for
They're
this.
monsters.
But like his hands was like he came into Ottawa and he was learning to do snatches or working on snatches or something. And he was down in the weight room where we were training, and his hands were like, I don't know, like like everything was just so, it was wild. Like it was like, that is a big dude. Like just the scale, it was wild. Anyway. And it stuck with
I
me because it was just like, holy shit. 'Cause I'm like
I
5'10", right? Like
no,
I'm not a
I
big guy,
remember
you know?
I remember the biggest human I'd ever seen was the people who are familiar with mixed martial arts will know it was I was at some club or something, and this guy walked in, and it was Alistair Overeem who was the champ. He actually beat up Brock Lesnar, and he made Brock Lesnar look normal sized against him. And this was at a period when Alistair Overeem was known as Alistair Ubereem because he was on a concoction of drugs. He's about, I think he's listed at 6'5", but he was walking around at like 270 and just
Jesus.
lean. But he originally had fought at light heavyweight at 210 a long time ago. So, and he was an adult then. so so it was but he walked in, I just remember, in a suit and glasses, and it looked like, it felt like the world had eclipsed around me, and just this monster had just walked in. I've never there are some people who are, as to our point with this podcast, who are legitimate super heavyweights. You know, they are actually that
Yes.
lean and that muscular, and they're big, and that division was always intended for athletes who are taller to be able to go into, and we see that in boxing again now. We see that with guys like Anthony Joshua. We see that with other professional fighters like Francis Ngannou, who are that big, and they're
Yeah,
just
no, they're
super
just
lean. Yeah,
like cartoonishly big.
yeah,
No, no, no.
it's not right. It's
All
awesome.
right. So I think that's it for today. We'll wrap it up. Tune in next week, folks. This 3-part series, unless we extend it, which I don't think we will. We'll get on to other things. Yeah. The overweight and obese athlete, or the fat athlete in the vernacular, which isn't the language anymore, but we don't mean any harm. All right. Have a good night.
Take care.